the seat.
Okay, we do have 8 board members, so we're going to go ahead and get started, everyone. If everyone can please be quiet. It's now 11 a.m. Thank you. So today we have a very busy day. We're going to be starting with our sexual harassment and assault presentation, and then we will stop for a lunch break around 12:30, hopefully. Following that, we will have a very extensive discussion on the strategic plan. Karen and I will make a decision by 2 p.m. as to what the schedule is going to look like for the rest of the day. If we're able to move through things very quickly, then we can maintain our current schedule. Otherwise, whatever we are not able to cover today will be pushed to Thursday night. I did. I'll get to you in a second, Elizabeth. I did have a request from Pat Hines, who has taken the day off from school and secured us and secured a substitute, that we try to fit in the equity piece, as she won't be able to join us on Thursday night either, and so we will take that into account. Elizabeth, you have a question on the schedule?
I do. I think it's incumbent upon us to do our best to get through this and not attempt to kind of Murphy's Law this, allow our discussion to fill time to talk about the strategic plan just to fill it. Sometimes things happen and we do have to, but I don't want us to predetermine that we're going to talk long enough that we're not going to get to the agenda items.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And so I'm hopeful we can keep it to 2 hours. And any spillover will go on Thursday night.
Yeah, and I just want to say I agree with that as well. And I would just ask our colleagues if we really want to get through everything, then certainly we're happy to kind of summarize, bring everything together, and if we kind of ask you to kind of cut it short, then hopefully we can do that.
Okay, so we're going to get started with our first presentation. We have a number of guests. I will remind the board that this was something that was brought to the forum, and that is why it is now coming to a board work session. It has now been delayed 4 months, so that is why it is at the start of our agenda today, so it doesn't get pushed off again. I know that unfortunately, Teresa is sick today, so Mr. Ramey will be leading this one for us.
Well, good morning. It's great to be around the table with the board. I thought there was a chance that I might not be here, but I'm here. And so for that little update on the personal side, point of privilege there. But again, always enjoy having conversations with the board. And this morning's topic is very, very important for our students and for our staff. And as such, we've put a team together to really help present today. And so before we get started, I just take a minute to let the team introduce themselves very quickly.
Good morning. I'm Brian Gibson. I'm the Acting Director of EER.
Daryl Sampson. I'm the Manager for Student Services Support.
Marianne Panarelli, Director of Intervention and Prevention Services.
Karen MacArthur Rodriguez. I'm a Specialist in Equity and Employee Relations.
Liz Payne, Instructional Services Coordinator for Health and Physical Education.
And we also have Lisa Alexander, who is one of our internal investigators in HR there on the front row. Dr. Brabrand's making room for her at the table, so that'd be great for her to join us. But you see kind of our key takeaways for the presentation today. And really, as we do, as I said, look at sexual assault and sexual harassment, both in the school and in the workplace. They're very important topics that have been in the spotlight, and it's something that we need to make sure that we take seriously and are proactive on for the protection of our students and for our staff. And so this morning, we have several topics that we're going to cover. We're going to start with information on student data, and then FCPS curriculum, responses, and intervention. And then we'll move into talk about trainings for employees, administrators, and instructional staff. And then really we will close the presentation and obviously take questions and discussion from the board around our focus on improvements, where we see there's areas for growth, and what we're doing as we move forward to ensure that we are providing a safe and secure environment for everyone in the school community. And so with that, I will turn it over to Liz to start today's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Ramey. Good morning, everyone. So, we do understand, I believe, generally that sexual violence is a national issue, and it refers to sexual activity when consent is not obtained or not given freely. Sexual violence includes those range of activities which include contact and non-contact situations. It also includes verbal harassment. And verbal harassment may be considered things such as images, pictures, memes, or written statements. So why is this important for Fairfax County Public Schools to take a look at? These are CDC statistics, national statistics, and this just speaks to rape, not, globally sexual violence. But I think the important thing here is that of those women and men who report experiencing rape or attempted rape, that those percentages of these activities happening prior to the age of 18 certainly nationally is an indication for us to take a look at this. And while CDC also says that while adolescence seems to be a period of high risk, college may also be of a particularly vulnerable time. In a large cross-sectional study of campus sexual assault, 20% of the undergraduate women indicated that they had been a victim of sexual violence since beginning college. So we really want to take the opportunity during their high school years to give them knowledge, skills, and strategies to hopefully prevent or avoid these situations for the present and into the future. Locally, in our Fairfax County Youth Survey, we have 2 questions that give us some indication about dating aggression. These questions, the results of these are aggregated responses for grades 8, 10, and 12 for the years 2015 and 2016. The first question is, have you ever had a partner in a dating or serious relationship who pressured you into having sex when you didn't want to? So while the majority of our students responded no, and we have seen slight decreases in the yes responses from 2015 to 2016, we still have over 1,000 students reporting issues with dating aggression and being pressured into having sex. The second question is stated to students, during the past 12 months, how many times did someone you were dating or going out with force you to do sexual things that you did not want to? Again, these are aggregated response from grades 8, 10, and 12. And while the majority of our students reported not dating in the past 12 months, those reporting forced to do sexual things still has dropped from about 1,500 yes responses being forced to about 1,300. Still is obviously an issue in the school division. Connections to our strategic plan, CDC has not identified a lot of clear protective factors against sexual violence. However, they have noted that academic achievement, emotional health, and connectedness are 3 things that are protective factors for students. And so we certainly want to make sure, again, that students have the knowledge and skills needed for prevention. And we also would have to probably assume that if they're dealing with issues of sexual violence, that they're not available for learning. We also want to ensure that we have an environment of no tolerance for sexual violence in any form for students and staff, and that we have personnel in place who are knowledgeable and can connect students and families with support and services as we do. We also want to ensure that our workforce is knowledgeable and able to respond appropriately whether the sexual violent issues affect students or staff. So Fairfax County Public Schools' approach to prevention and response to sexual assault and sexual harassment is addressed through multiple offices, as you see presented here: instructional services, special services, and human resources. So I'm going to talk specifically about student-based instruction. Sexual violence prevention is included in our family life education curriculum. And what I've tried to display before you is sort of the scaffolded learning that takes place from K to 12. And we start as early as kindergarten with talking about good touch, bad touch, and the emphasis on say no, go, and tell. So the emphasis on telling, emphasis on accessing resources and people they can go to, trusted adults, begins as early as kindergarten. We begin instructing explicitly about sexual abuse beginning in 3rd grade, and that then continues on up through 12th grade. 2 areas that we know that we believe FCPS is leading regarding sexual violence prevention is one is human trafficking, the area of human trafficking that we know we've had in place for several years. And thank you to the board for supporting the resolution in January for Human Trafficking Month. It's greatly appreciated. Last year, as a result of our human trafficking instruction, we had 2 students that I'm aware of that reported. One reported back in the fall of a previous school year, was that 16, 17? And it went to prosecution, and the person was successfully prosecuted and sentenced in September. A second student in the spring, is my understanding, they did not go to the police department. However, they did access one of the resources in the video that is receiving counseling service to get out of the situation. So those are just 2 that I am personally aware of. So the other place that we are leading with instruction is around sexual assault and consent. Again, that also is in our family life education curriculum. So we are, for both human trafficking and sexual consent, we are routinely approached by media outlets. Just talked to Washington Post the other day about our consent curriculum. So we are leading in those areas. Also, just one short backup, we do talk instruction about healthy and unhealthy relationships. We reiterate about resources for students all throughout and able to connect them with our school psychologists, counselors, and social workers. We also write into those lessons that teachers may want to invite those special services folks into the lesson if they're available, and if not, make sure that they make them aware of the instruction because traditionally that reporting increases when we do this instruction. So looking to the future of how we may be able to expand our instructional response, I'm working with the Office for Women and Domestic and Sexual Violence Services. They are helping me create some more information for teacher training. All teachers who instruct family life education are required by DOE and the state to have training. So this would be an added module to give them more information around sexual violence, sexual abuse, dating violence. Teachers have expressed an interest in some more information. We've also been in conversation with the police department. The Fair Oaks District office offers some self-defense courses. They offer it, I think it's every once a month on Tuesdays. It's an auxiliary officer, so I'm not sure that it's a paid position. It may be a voluntary position. They did conduct an after-school self-defense class for students, an optional course at Oakton. In talking with them as late as this morning, I don't believe they have the capacity to meet the need at all schools, but maybe something that can be offered and work through them. We'll have to do some more conversation with them around that. So there are a variety of things that can be done, and we're looking for some input and leadership decision around those. So there are self-defense trainings that could happen. There are empowerment kind of programs that are out there. I'm going to go to one in April in Loudoun County that I've looked into. Secure Higher Ed has a high school program to see what theirs is more specifically. There are school culture programs. Green Dot is one of those school culture programs. Green Dot is actually being used at UVA, has been for the last, this is their 4th year and required for all of their incoming freshmen. So there is a variety of ways to approach this, and need some discussion around whether it should be optional for student participation, compulsory, and tied to curriculum, how things might be approached. Many of these have financial implications, so that would be another consideration. So with that, I will pass it on to Marianne.
So I'm going to address the broader issue of sexual harassment. And we have had extensive training. For those of you who may not be aware or may not recall, in 2014, Fairfax County Public Schools entered into a voluntary resolution agreement with the Office of Civil Rights in response to a complaint of in a situation where the parents felt that the allegation of sexual harassment was not investigated fully, and felt that the child who had made the allegation was not effectively protected following making that allegation. As a result of that, there was extensive work done that I'm going to highlight for you across multiple different sectors, from curriculum to training for administrators and training for students. Again, just to give you a little bit of context, starting 2013, 15, 16, we have had a question. Originally, on 2013, had one question: have you been sexually harassed in the last year? There are now a total of 8 questions that have some element of sexual harassment to them, including, would you report if you were sexually harassed? If you would not report, why not? And trying to help us narrow in on what kinds of additional support materials will we need to provide to try to be sure that students felt comfortable reporting when something has happened. In terms of the incidence of sexual harassment, there has been a decline in the number of students who have been reporting that since we've put in the various materials and interventions that we've put into place, and that decline has occurred across ethnic groups and different age groups. So one of the first pieces that we were asked to do was to review our curriculum on sexual harassment. Again, as Liz said, curriculum comes from multiple sources around these topics. So there had been some information put out by our office, but most of the information, especially at the elementary level, was coming through counseling lessons. So we worked with the Office of Women and Domestic and Sexual Violence. We worked with one of the experts there. We reviewed curriculum from across the country. We looked at best practices from other locations around the country in terms of how they covered this topic with younger children. We found that most of the published curriculum only went down through 7th grade. And yet we were trying to reach the children earlier. That was one of both the requirements of the agreement and something we felt was important. So what you see above are lessons that were created in partnership with the domestic violence expert on how we can address this in a developmentally appropriate way. So in 6th grade, the explicit sexual harassment information is brought into the curriculum with an opt-out for parents who wish to do so. The lessons are reinforced from year to year, and they build on lessons that they are simultaneously getting in family life education around, appropriate distance and space between people, how we respect each other's physical space, how we respect each other's emotional space, etc. In grades 7 through 12, our initial response was to create a PowerPoint, a voiced-over PowerPoint that all 7th through 12th graders review when they have SR&R lessons at the beginning of the year. We did it in that method because we knew we needed to cover explicitly, here's the definitions that we are talking about, here are the people that you can report to, here are, signs that someone is being harassed, things you can do as a bystander to help your friend, etc. So it was very explicit information that needed to be sort of put out in a sample. After that first year, when we put it out quickly, again, everything that we created had to then be reviewed by the Office of Civil Rights and then get back to us, and then we had to have a mechanism for getting it out to broad populations of people. So that first year, we got the PowerPoints approved, and that's what we did. Then during the next year, during that school year, we held 35 or 40 focus groups with school administrators, teachers, and students to delve deeper into the issue of would you report? Why wouldn't you report? Is this sexual harassment? Is this sexual harassment? And we wove in, because we felt like we needed to do a broader topic than simply sexual harassment. We wove in all forms of harassment, discriminatory harassment, as well as some information about bullying in those focus groups to get that information back. The what is now ORSI, the Office of Research and Strategic Improvement, conducted those. They wrote a report. I believe they presented that report to you, but that report is certainly available with all of their findings from that report. That, in coordination with the information we were getting from the youth survey, we used to revise the training, not just for students, but for teachers and for administrators, to weave in more of the areas that we knew had been an area of concern. This is one area that we see a need for continued improvement with, and have started this year meeting with groups of students to start to develop some short video sketches, for lack of a better word, that will be embedded within the PowerPoint. So we're still sure we're getting all the factual information that we are required to give the students, but give them some more engaging ways to get that information. And those are being developed in a way that the intention is that they could then also be used in various social media platforms. So they're short vignettes that go with the information that's coming across the 7th through 12th grade. In terms of response and intervention, we made a strategic decision to, again, not simply focus our training on investigating and responding with the administrators and with the teachers to just sexual harassment, but to any form of harassment and bullying. Because we were aware that at any given moment we might get questions about, okay, and what are you doing about harassment based on race or harassment based on special education needs or whatever. And so we wove it together. We created a whole variety of materials. I'm not going to go into great length with you about those materials, but these are the support materials that were developed for the schools so that we were speaking a common language in terms of what is bullying, what is harassment, what is sexual harassment, what's the differences, how do we code it in the student information system so that we're doing the correct things. The other piece, one more time. Oh, sorry. The correct piece was, a piece was that in the correction that we were doing with the Office of Civil Rights, we had to have a way to track not just founded cases of bullying and harassment, but allegations of bullying and harassment. And so to do that, we developed this bullying and harassment management system. The other materials, we also, I want to draw your attention to, we had a close collaboration with the police department because for our administrators, one of the confusing elements had been if something had come to their attention that involved the police in some way, who was taking forward the investigation. And some of our administrators were saying, well, it's been reported to the police, we have to back off entirely until, it goes to court and there's a resolution. And we clarified with the police department that in those cases, the police may be the first person to do the interviewing of the students involved so that they're getting straight information from them. But that once those interviews are done, then our administrators would step in and continue on with whatever disciplinary processes we would normally have in place. The harassment management system documents allegations on student, to be clear, this is student-on-student harassment and bullying within FCPS, and it also has spaces for the administrator to document what steps they have taken, parent contacts, notifications, it has links to letters that they can send to parents, as well as things like if a student who has a disability is involved either as the aggressor or as the victim in a harassment or a bullying situation, it is required that there be consideration about whether the IEP team needs to be involved to determine whether the student needs some additional support or some additional skill building, et cetera. So the behavior management system is built so that it flags those kids to remind the administrator to go back to the IEP team to bring up various topics. In terms of continual improvement efforts, each summer we have a group that look at the current lessons and make a determination about whether, based on questions we're getting, based on information that we've pulled from the youth survey, based on other topics, do we need to adjust those lessons? We also provide ongoing and frequent support to administrators who call in. Jen Spears back there is from my office and often is fielding some of those questions. Daryl takes many of those questions about what are the right steps in terms of the, and then we send them to Karin as well if it's a strict sexual harassment and not one of the bullying kinds of questions, so that we're sure that we are giving administrators consistent advice and helping them document in a systematic way. The other thing that we have done is we've developed materials specifically for students with low cognitive ability, as well as for students who are ESOL level 1 and 2. In addition to the curricular materials we've developed for them, we developed a shortened survey. It's not the 100-plus question survey of the youth survey, but it is about a 20-question survey that is specifically about sexual harassment and school climate. Translated, they can listen to it in English, listen to it in one of 7 languages. The students with cognitive disabilities have visual and reduced language, and there's visual markers so that they can indicate. Having done that now for multiple years, we see that the students who are in those classes are reporting lower levels of sexual harassment than the others on the youth survey. We think this may be because they tend to be in very self-contained kind of settings, and therefore there's much more supervision. They're not moving as frequently, I don't know, into a locker room or whatever without adult supervision. In addition to that, we sort of proactively monitor what kinds of cases are being brought forward. And then if we see a common question coming across or a common mistake being made, we will address that to all administrators when we see those kinds of things. As I said, we're working on developing this video and social messaging to more directly get out to the kids in the language that they have. We have worked with some school teams of students who wanted to do presentations themselves to their student body or to their parent body or to their teacher body. And in each case, we have supported them in that work to be sure that what they are sharing is in fact accurate information, because sometimes they need a little assistance in that area. And then in terms of professional development, this has been extensive. So there is already, the Virginia Department of Education requires a child abuse and neglect recognition and intervention training that all teachers need to do, all educational personnel, because everyone is a reporter. So everyone does that training. As Liz already referenced, there's FLE training for all FLE teachers. And then we created a training that is an e-learn-it training for all teachers, counselors, psychologists, social workers, which again just gives definitions of what sexual harassment is, how to recognize it, is interactive in a way that gives you an opportunity to look at different examples, and then leads through the steps that one should take, as well as highlighting repeatedly who to report to within the school system if one, depending on what your level is, if one has a concern. For administrators, all school-based administrators received face-to-face training. So this has been over the course of a number of years. The first year, all school administrators received a 3-hour face-to-face training that was specifically about this topic. The next year, they received training around how to use the bullying and harassment management system and what it what its uses are. Any new administrator who comes in needs to complete both of those trainings. And in an ongoing way, each year as we do the SR&R review for the administrators, we include any new information and again reinforce those areas where we feel that there may have been a little bit of a weakness in how people were implementing. We've also created a school liaison at each school, an administrator who has responsibilities within the bullying and harassment management system to review, bring it back to the administrative team, make sure cases are closed out, make sure the different pieces of information that are required are in there. And they also serve as a two-way source of communication for us so that we can find out from them what's working, what's not working, can we help, and as well as share information if things are changing. And then, of course, there is ongoing consultation. And then we get to human resources.
Okay, so I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight the variety of trainings that the Department of Human Resources is currently in place regarding sexual harassment and misconduct. We've utilized a variety of different methods to complete these trainings for employees. We've had a training on Regulation 4444, which is the prevention of sexual misconduct and abuse. We also have the discrimination and harassment training, which is done online, and we record completion through. It's currently completed through the onboarding process. And then we also have the sexual harassment and bullying and harassment trainings that Marianne previously mentioned. We've also incorporated those into professional development playlists so that the instructional personnel is reminded to complete that annually, and it's also recorded. Gotcha. The adult sexual misconduct training is annual, like as I mentioned, was annually required for instructional personnel. We conduct that through the eLearnit system. The voice over PowerPoint reviews existing guidelines, which provides clear guidelines and delineations for the interactions of employees and students. It provides them with the employees with clear delineations between acceptable and unacceptable communications. Like I said, the instructional personnel are reminded to complete that annually so that they're aware of what their responsibilities and the guidelines of their interactions with each other. Regulation 44 has, as I said, was clear demarcations of appropriate boundaries between students and staff. This includes guidelines on their face-to-face communications, as well as physical contact and any electronic and social media communications. So it includes information related to that. It provides a review on topics of areas of conversation and comments that should never be used between students and staff, as well as guidance on boundaries for their personal relationships. Many times we find that our staff members have personal relationships with students that may go beyond the bounds of their school and into their community. So there are guidelines around those interactions as well. It provides a clear review of responsibilities for employees to report certain actions, including a reminder for principals and program managers that to remind employees that they're mandated reporters for certain actions, for suspected abuse, for suspected misconduct, that those instances must be reported to the principals and the authorities. There's also a reminder of their obligations that allegations of sexual misconduct and abuse by employees must be reported to the Department of Human Resources. And this training, we've previously provided it to all employees, but as I mentioned, currently it is an annual requirement for instructional personnel. It's currently being developed for incorporation into a PD playlist for support staff as well. When it comes to the discrimination, harassment, and awareness training, that is currently completed electronically through the onboarding process. This includes all hourly and temporary employees as well. It also extends to coaches and contractors. They are required to complete this video. It's an interactive quiz-based kind of training. Hopefully you've all completed it. Any badged employee, anyone who receives a plastic FCPS badge is required to complete this, and that's recorded so that we can ensure completion. So credit is given to employees on their transcripts. The discrimination and harassment video provides a review of definitions regarding discrimination and harassment, as well as examples of behaviors and conduct, and those things that could be considered as harassment in the workplace. A review is done interactively, as I mentioned, through quizzes to help identify what behaviors could be discriminatory, harassing in nature. The training video reviews the employee's obligations to conduct themselves in a manner that is professional, to not engage in harassing or discriminating behavior towards others, as well as the reminder that every employee has the right to work in an environment that is free of this behavior. Employees are also reminded that they should feel free and welcome to come and report that information to their program manager, to their principal, and to the Department of Human Resources, that we are always willing and able to hear those incidents, and that is something that is protected. Unfortunately, as we know all too well in this climate, claims of sexual harassment are often unreported. Unfortunately, as the Department of Human Resources knows, we can only investigate those incidents that come to our attention. Given our small staff, we currently only have 5 investigators who conduct full-time investigations of, including sexual harassment. We also have 2 full-time school investigators. Brian will soon be returning to his role as one of our school investigators. And coupled with the volume of tasks that EER is tasked with completing, education is something that HR has recognized that we've kind of got to step up on, and we're looking forward to taking this opportunity to capitalize on the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement, and really kind of, you know, capitalize on the ability of our office and our staff, now that we've received a little more staffing support, to go out and provide more educational opportunities for our staff. It's something that the division has previously been unable to do, so we're really looking forward to expand those in the future. During the 2016-17 and the current school year, HR received 11 claims of sexual harassment. Now, that being said, those are sexual harassment claims that when they came into our office, on their face, they involved issues of sexual harassment. We currently do not have a mechanism that allows us to adequately capture when claims come in as reported as something else, but when we do an investigation, have a finding that involves sexual harassment. So it's hard to accurately and adequately represent what those findings may show. It's something that we continue to explore so we can adequately and accurately provide information to you on what those outcomes are. Now, in the 11 reported claims that we do have, 7 of those were reported to be between employees, so employee on employee sexual harassment. In 6 of these 7 instances, EER's investigation did lead to a finding of sexual harassment or some other type of human relations violation, and in 6 of those instances, hi, Walter. EER worked with managers to ensure that the employees had the appropriate consequences, ranging from counseling for lesser violations to termination for more egregious violations. In 4 of the 11 instances, we did conduct investigations involving sexual harassment issues that I'll refer to as impacting students. And that ranges from anywhere from a teacher who did not take appropriate action when students were engaging in some behavior in class, all the way up to, you know, using sexually suggestive materials that were really inappropriate for the lesson, or making sexually explicit comments to students. And in each of those instances, at the conclusion of the investigation, EER was able to assist principals to take appropriate disciplinary action. Now, in addition to that, EER works closely with the internal investigators, Brian Gibson and Lisa Alexander, when the allegations of sexual misconduct are involved. The school investigators are experienced and focused on matters of student safety. They work in extensive collaboration with law enforcement, and that includes Fairfax County Police Department, the FBI, Child Protective Services. They conduct the sensitive and confidential investigations into those alleged misconduct by FCPS employees. They consult and report to law enforcement on a continual and ongoing basis, and they often undertake simultaneous and collaborative investigations with those authorities. They then work closely with our staff to ensure that appropriate disciplinary action is taken against employees when when the evidence suggests that violations have occurred. And these findings often lead to an employee being separated and may, when appropriate, lead to a revocation of an educational employee's professional license. Again, HR is recognizing that getting the message out to the employees is key. We're looking to utilize resources to be more proactive in educating and reaching employees. And so to that end, I'll highlight some of the ways we're working to reinforce our message and to provide information. That's one. In 2016-17 and now annually, HR has begun presenting at the fall meetings for the all-county principals and all-county assistant principals. And at that opportunity, we provide a review of what is sexual harassment, what are principal and administrators' responsibilities in ensuring employees know and understand their role in prevention and reporting. as well as a review of professional behavior and conduct in the workplace and what training staff in their building must complete. Additionally, we've taken the opportunity, school investigators, Lisa and Brian, have presented breakout sessions at the all-county principals meeting this year. In these breakout sessions, they provided the principals with information about how they work with investigators and with law enforcement to ensure the safety of our students. And this they include more information about the investigations that they're conducting to provide principals with a real framework of what those interactions are going to look like, and if somebody in their building has a report, what's going to go on, and the steps that are being taken at that time. In November of this year, HR issued an actiongram to all principals. At that time, we required administrators to review regulations 4950 and 4444, that's sexual harassment and that prevention of sexual misconduct and abuse regulations. The instruction was to review those regulations with staff so that staff were familiar and understood their roles and their responsibilities in those regards. And so that, and they were required to then report back that they did in fact review this with their staff and provide documentation. Now, while HR did make the change to require any person being badged and fingerprinted to complete the onboarding process and ensure that they've completed the discrimination and harassment awareness training, we are taking additional steps to undertake to remind these employees of their further obligations. We've worked to communicate directly with principals and the directors of student activities to remind them of their responsibility to share with their coaching staff and with their staff who may not be full-time employees about what their requirements and obligations are under our regulations. I know that's a message that's shared by Bill Curran at most of the division director of student activities. We usually call them DSAs. I know that's something that Mr. Curran provides, meaningful and conversation with those DSAs and assistant DSAs on the regular basis to make sure that those individuals are aware of their responsibilities. But Brian has gone out and shared further information with these individuals, providing opportunity for questions, reminding of their obligations, what to share with those coaching staff within their building, and remind them of their obligations to report those incidents. As shared earlier, my office continues to partner with special services staff in a variety of ways to provide input and insight into new projects and developments and opportunities for us to collaborate. We recognize the amazing and tireless work that special services undertakes in providing support to our students, particularly in those instances where they have student-on-student harassment issues. And we're working with them to provide a mechanism to ensure that those things continue when there's an issue or a report of a sexual harassment or misconduct involving a staff member involving students.
Great. I'd like to thank the entire team for the in-depth information they provided today. And we are always looking for opportunities. It's not static. There's always more that we can do. And so we're seeing some of the opportunities that we have available for us as we move forward, looking at video and social media opportunities to enhance our trainings. Karin mentioned about instructional staff. We know that we need to provide those same opportunities for our support staff. That's something we're working with our PD department on as they build out that playlist to make that available. We also recognize that while there's great collaboration between the departments, we can do some things there as well to ensure that when students are impacted in a situation that involves an adult and a student, they receive those same resources from DSS as when those impacts are between student and student. And so we need to look for ways to enhance those as well. Look for opportunities to develop resources for our students as they transition from our high schools, as well as look at additional programming in certain areas and continue to develop our partnerships. We mentioned with CPS and the local law enforcement. So to look at continue those. Actually, Lisa was with CPS last week giving a presentation to CPS. So not only looking at how CPS can support us, but how we can support them in the work that they're doing. So keeping those channels of communication open, as well as being good colleagues to our surrounding school divisions and know what best practices they're using. And so to have those conversations with the other divisions to see what's working for them so we can use their best practices, and also make sure that we're letting them know our best practices. While clearly FCPS is our focus, we want all kids to be safe in school, and so we want to make sure that it's a regional and even national effort as we approach these. Again, I thank you for your time this morning on what is clearly a very, very important topic, as well as to the team for all their countless effort or their work putting this together and their countless days of effort just keeping our students and our staff protected and safe. And with that, we'll open it up to the board for discussion.
Okay, I have Sandy Evans, Dahlia Palchik, Karen Corbett Sanders, Janie Strauss, Elizabeth Schultz, and Megan.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for the very extensive presentation. It's clear we have a very impressive array of both curriculum and training on this topic. So I had a few questions on specific issues, and I wanted to start with way back on page 7. We talked about the curriculum on human trafficking, which is a huge issue now. At one point we thought some communities were somehow exempt from this, but we know it's much more far-reaching than we believed in the past. So I wanted to find out where this fits in. I see we've got an extensive curriculum, grades 6 through 12, but where does this fit in with the training and the interventions? We have the curriculum where I gather we tell our students what they should look for, warning signs for the students. Do we also have training of our administrators and our teachers for them to be on the lookout for this and to report it? All right.
In our required training for teachers who instruct family life education, we do have information about human trafficking in that, and some look-fors and things in there. So we do have it for teachers. We don't have anything specific for human trafficking from my office for administrators that I'm aware of.
And are they required to report? Is this part of the child? I mean, they have to report child abuse and neglect. Are they expected to be on the lookout for this issue as well?
So a couple things. The sex trafficking curriculum also has videos that parents can watch and community members can watch. Mm-hmm. And so, as she said, the teachers, I had all of the psychologists, social workers have viewed those videos so that they are aware of those things. We come at this again from multiple angles. So some of the work of the gang task force is around sexual trafficking. Sometimes we have uncovered an issue when we were investigating attendance problems. Mm-hmm. So we are working together, and at least within DSS, I feel pretty comfortable that our people know to report. And then, as Liz said, but that may be an area of improvement that we can look at in terms of making sure that all the administrators are aware as well.
Would this also come under the purview of the school liaison for bullying and harassment, or would it not at this point?
It is not something that we have explicitly called out to them, but it is certainly, they are all administrators, so it is certainly, again, something that we could work on.
I think that might be something we should do. It's a growing issue, and if this is something that they could be on the lookout for as well. Just two other areas. Internet, I see that's grades 7 through 12. Have we considered pulling it to the lower grades at this point? I think 3-year-olds are on the internet.
There is internet safety, general internet safety in the general health curriculum.
I see.
That doesn't speak specifically to predation.
I see.
But is definitely a lot of internet safety sprinkled throughout.
So we're aware of that. Okay, and the only other question I had really at this point is when we talk about dating, healthy dating relationships, it's interesting to see the numbers about how a majority of our kids have not dated in the last year. So that's a change from generations past, I believe. Are we adapting to that reality in terms of acknowledging that and that the relationships may not be part of a dating relationship? It may be part of a different type of relationship now.
So I think instructionally we talk about a variety of relationships, just not dating when it comes to exploitation. Regarding the questions, I think the questions said a little more global.
On the youth survey?
Yes, it said dating or serious relationship. So it depends how they define dating or serious
I
relationship.
see. Okay. Well, it's just something for us to be cognizant of, that is a change over the course of time. And actually, that raised one last question, which is, do we have any question on the youth survey that addresses human trafficking?
I would have to look to be sure. I don't think that we have an explicit question. We have questions about, is there someone who tries to control and know every minute of where you are? We have questions. So we have questions that might uncover that, but we don't have a question explicitly about,
right,
have you been trafficked?
We might want to think
We'd have
about
to worry
that.
about how we would phrase that question.
Right.
But we don't have that one. And the youth survey, the questions and sort of format and whatever are up for review in 2020. So we've begun collecting possible changes.
We might want to think about that. Thank you.
Great. Dahlia?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for this presentation. Just trying to gather my thoughts. First of all, I just as I think it'll be helpful when we do our equity work, I think having the school liaison sounds like a great move to ensure that at every school we do have that two-way communication and a way to train. Maybe are they going to be used as a training of trainers as well?
We have not used them because, again, they're all administrators whose plates are pretty full. So what we have really used them for is to work as the key person on the administrative team to share new resources that we provide.
Okay, and have we considered, or is it up to consider to have it not be an administrator to be able to do more training with them?
Well, we have considered different pieces. One of the things about the system that they have to enter the information is you have to be an administrator to enter the information because it ties to SIS discipline, and those are the people who are handling that. And so we didn't want to make that too broad. So that is why we didn't select a different person. Again, through Jen and Karin, Annie, they are out and doing trainings all the time. Individualized, like I'm coming to this school to help you. If a school says we haven't had a case and now we do, and maybe we need a refresher on that training that you gave us in September.
Right. No, I understand that, and that's a little bit different. The only thing I guess to consider is,
a school-based trainer of some sort,
or someone that as a teacher, as a member of staff or a student, may sometimes feel more comfortable as opposed to going to a direct. Report, someone they report to an administrator, just trying to ensure that there's a place that doesn't feel short. I don't like using.
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
the
liaison is not at all the person that we are saying is the person that kids should report to or that teachers should report to. They're just a mechanism for our office to get information to every school, to an individual at each school. All kids are told, any adult in the building, whomever you feel safe with, and all teachers are told it is their responsibility, and here are the expected responses. And among those are you need to go to your administrator with the information.
Sure.
So,
no, it may be moving forward.
In terms of training.
Yeah, no, I guess I'm saying if we do move forward with having a school liaison for our equity work, they may start to see people come to them with issues related to sexual harassment and discrimination. So it might be something to also ensure that they, if we move forward that plan, will be trained and know how to help. And it could be a parent coming to them, right,
okay,
with an issue to report, where they don't feel there could be retaliation in any way. Just
okay, thanks.
Proactive. But I think that's a great, I appreciate knowing that. I guess my question, I think you addressed it a little bit, is so the training modules, there's that required one for onboarding, and could you explain briefly what is the follow-up, the follow-up training for staff after that onboarding? It's an annual module?
The annual module is regarding the adult sexual misconduct, and that's the prevention of the regulation 4444, and that's currently it's for instructional or educational personnel. They do have that annual requirement. and we're working on getting it instituted so that the support staff would also have it as part of their PD playlist and then have to complete that annually.
Okay, because personally, I know we had to take the IT annual, and I want to say it was an excellent program. It was personalized. It really, popped and made you pay attention. And so I know these tend to get dry. So ensuring that anything we can do to make it, I think it had a lot of FCPS stuff in there, which definitely makes you pay attention.
And I think part of having worked with special services closely and getting ideas on how we're instituting like the student trainings, I'm then able to bring back to Chase so that we can then, kind of put that into practice for our employees and make it more, dynamic.
Right, yeah. So I agree. And anything, if you need anything from us I just want to ensure that is happening, that it's relevant and people are focused and paying attention. And also, you talked about coaches a little bit, but a little bit more where they will be included, and also any volunteers or people engaged in working with our after-school programming?
If, as I mentioned, anybody who receives an FCPS badge, so that's basically anybody who's an hourly, a temporary, or a stipend employee, they're going to have to complete that online training, and we are able to kind of capture that information. It's a little bit harder when it comes to volunteers. A lot of times those parents are coming into the school and, they check in at the school, but we don't necessarily have a record or a mechanism to train them specifically on our policies and procedures. So, we're definitely open to hearing ideas, right. Because it is a little bit more difficult to reach every kind of person that comes within our schools and who's walking in the door. We do have the safety the procedures in check to make sure that they're safe people coming in, but, to ensure that, yes, they're complying with our policies and regulations.
We need to have a broader conversation on volunteers in our school and about how we are tracking volunteers because we're so large. A lot of it's done at the building level, and it's just a matter of putting some systematic processes in place, Dahlia. And so it's a great question, but I don't think that we can look at our volunteers and how we are addressing that important piece of what supports our schools in only that narrow window. We need to talk about it in a more broader context, and that's one of those important pieces. But I just put that out there to know that I think it is probably time for us as an administration or as the board in collaboration to talk really about, okay, what is that overall approach to ensuring volunteers are safe in our buildings?
That helps. And then, but for the after-school programming, what do we currently require with any vendors we work with or the PTAs work with to bring people to do some of our programming after school? I feel like middle school, elementary school has quite a bit of that.
Middle school, that process, because middle school programming is through the Neighborhood and Community Services, that we're in partnership with Neighborhood and Community Services. We have an MOU with them, and any of their groups that are coming in have to go through our volunteer badging process, which means fingerprinting, et cetera. If an individual after-school program brings in, one person to let's do cake decorating today, we don't have a mechanism for that. As Chase said, that's sort of part of the broader volunteers. But the after-school program, the middle school after-school program, we do have a process in place. That's not, again, typically at the elementary level, those are parents who are providing those.
They're working quite a bit with vendors now as well. But
anyone who is working with a vendor, yes, they should actually have some form of an MOU with us, and we should have some process to get them.
But it doesn't currently require this kind of training, is that correct? Just the badging and the background check?
And on what type of program it is and what type of vendor contract there is. When it comes, there are certain, vendor contracts where, if they're coming in and it's something that they're going to be, one that mostly sticks out in my brain is we have a lot of school renovations going on, and those contractors, a lot of them then are issued FCPS badges, and we do have certain protocols for that. I don't know necessarily that we do have them for certain, I know at my children's school we have, a run-a-thon, and I don't know that vendor has a specific, because they're not in the school all the time, they're there for one event. I believe, again, it's more along the lines of a member of understanding.
Right, but say you had an after-school science club run by a vendor. What kind of training? That's
Right.
okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, so
there's-
that is an area to look at. No, thank you.
Yeah, if there are coaches, if there are activities that we're putting on, we can ensure that those employees are then, badged and completing our trainings.
Right.
When they are
Have
outside
more and more that
vendors.
we are with outside vendors, so that's helpful. So I have two more questions. One being about peers. I know I visited some of our middle school programs, and some of the questions they ask their students are not just about themselves, but about any peers, who may be not comfortable with sharing. As we look at the survey, and correct me if I'm wrong, if some of those are on there, have we considered trying to gather data and having another place where students, especially at the high school level, can share a concern about a peer who may be targeted and not sharing that?
Again, this is part of sort of the general messaging that we have been giving to students, whether it is suicide prevention or it is threat assessment or it is part of the sexual trafficking. Part of the messaging there is we're giving you this messaging so you can reach out and get help for a friend, even if it does not directly apply to you. So I can't think of something like, we don't have a question on the youth survey that asks, have you ever referred a friend? But what I do know is we have seen significant increases in students making referrals to counseling, to psychology, and to social work, and I'm sure across teachers as well. I only know my world. For any one of those issues, the kids are pretty engaged at this point with trying to reach out and help friends.
No, that's helpful, because I know in some instances, people are able to use big data in order to gather information you maybe don't get from a survey. So I know we can't necessarily access that, but any other ways we can do that. My last question is, I believe a couple months ago, NPR did a pretty big story on sexual harassment for people and students with intellectual disabilities. So I know you focus on that a little bit. It sounds like they found 7 times more incidents than people without disabilities. So especially as we prepare them to go through our system and beyond, are we specifically doing programming to target them? And
yes, and we have at one point I thought, well, we should do this with all of the kids because it just cuts through all the words.
Right.
And it just says, nobody can touch you here or here. I mean, it's right. Very explicit training, and we have had that for FLE, but this was specifically around issues of harassment. We're very aware of the data that says that these children are very vulnerable to child abuse and various forms of abuse because of their limited ability to communicate. And so that has been a piece of that. Really, our feeling was, the involvement on the youth survey may or may not be a helpful thing, right. But the lessons were very critical and are things that now those teachers have all been taught to present.
And do we feel that on the reporting side that they have necessary access to be able to report uncomfortably?
Again, it seems that, and we did more work at that level with parents, it seems that the teacher is the most likely person that they're going to have contact with and going to report something to. And so our effort was to get to the teachers to say, you need to listen when a child does this, and these are the steps that you need to take. Again, they're still in a difficult situation sometimes, and sometimes it takes one of the psychologists or somebody trying to work with the child to get a deeper understanding of what it is that they are trying to tell us.
Have we seen?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Dahlia. That was we want to be able, we have about 28 more minutes, and I want to make sure we have the first opportunity. So if we have follow-on questions, we may have to add a second list, but I want to make sure everybody gets a first go round. Next, we have Karen Corbett-Sanders.
Great, thank you, and I'll try to make this brief. First, I want to thank you for all of your hard work in this area. It is a very important area, and I am especially appreciative of Mr. McElveen for bringing this to our attention early on. Do have a few questions regarding a couple things, and I was glad that Ms. Evans mentioned the change in dating, because dating is now online and they don't consider it dating. And so having to really go deep on this and having a focused education curriculum on online usage and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, because kids may not even know that they are being controlled via their cell phones. And so I would just think that that is something that we want to add into our curriculum. Additionally, talking about training, we do a lot of great training for our students, and you address that our family life education teachers are trained, especially in the area of human trafficking. But this is a national problem, and it's a problem that I believe more people need to be educated on rather than keeping it tight to just the family life education. And I would urge that all of our administrators should be required to do training in the area of trafficking, so that our administrators and our counselors, and that we actually try to drive into our education of parents, rather than just tying it to the family life education, but also making sure that parents are aware of it in collaboration maybe with the PTAs, PTOs, and others, so that there is a greater awareness of the threats and how you can be more proactive and how to talk to your children about these issues, and how our administrators and our senior level building folks and all of our counselors need to be aware of what's out there and what the risks are. And along those lines, I very much welcome the work that's been done so far with our students, but it's got to be more than a once-a-year FLE curriculum. It really should be something that we should be doing as a school system of pushing information out about what the concerns are and educating people on that. And so I would urge people to do that. I would like a next step to extend the training on sexual harassment as well as trafficking to not only those that are listed, but all of our building administrators and to our coaches, especially on the sexual harassment piece. I can tell you that our coaches have to take concussion training every year, and there's no reason why this isn't added as a required training, because sometimes we just, an inadvertent joke may be considered a joke by an adult and may be considered harassment by a student. And so just making people more conscious is really what it's about. And I wanted to just briefly address you mentioned adult volunteers in the building, and I'm glad, Dahlia, you mentioned that. When I taught Sunday school, one of the things that was required for every volunteer in Sunday school was to take Virtues training, which had a requirement on being educated on what there were threats out there, including harassment. And so I don't think that just because someone volunteers in our schools, there's no reason why we can't expect a certain amount of training if they're going to be in our schools on a regular basis. And then last, I talked about the ongoing rather than once a year. I think that some of our schools do, and I put across everybody's tables the Just Ask flyer, but having that up in our schools in a deliberate manner in every school rather than, because it's a tough subject, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it. You don't necessarily even have to talk about it. There's information available and they can go looking for it themselves. But it's something that we need to make it well known and well understood. In business organizations, harassment policies are public. They're put up on walls. We can do the same thing. And then your 5 investigators, is that sufficient?
Thank you for that question. I appreciate Dr. Brabrand's already provided some resources for us to expand our internal investigators. And one of the things, as Carr mentioned, we want to do that is so we can provide more education. I've been working with Dr. Lockhart and looking at that. For 40,000 employees and 188,000 students, when we look at the breadth of those over 200,000 individuals, along with volunteers and others, that's a lot of folks for our team to address, Ms. Corbett Sanders. So as I look at that, would I enjoy some more resources in that area? Most definitely. I think my team's doing a great job with what they have, but it becomes a matter of timing, prioritization, and then you have to look at cases and shuffle them so you address the most pressing ones first. But no, I would tell you that we are short-staffed in that regard. But that's no different than my colleagues sitting at the table, or and in some of the other areas as well. But yes, we could use more resources in that area.
So, just as next steps, I would like to have an extension of our training that currently is only given to the FLE staff to extend to building administrators and counselors. The second next step would be that okay, typically you got them all? Okay, and then the last piece.
She collects them and then reviews them.
Yeah, so. Oh, I know, but typically we give them as we speak, but that's okay. And my last piece is on the bullying and harassment database and trainings. What's absent here is the data collection on bullying and harassment, adults on student. That hasn't been discussed here at all, but I would suggest that is something that we have to also collect that data so that if we see trends. And I think that's it.
Thank you. Next we have Ms. Strauss.
Thank you. This is very impressive. A tremendous amount of work. And I think we're all very grateful for the care that you give our students and the careful supervision of our employees. I do agree that obviously coaches and all of that whole other group, they need this. And I'm assuming that is in the works. So I fully support that. A couple of quick questions. One is state reporting. What are the current state requirements for clearly criminal activity, child protective services? I believe that's always been there. But then where are we with bullying or suspected bullying or what have you?
So in terms of founded cases of bullying and harassment, they are reported to the Virginia Department of Education with the rest of the discipline information. The Office of Civil Rights has a periodic request for allegations of bullying and harassment. That is within the last 2 years. That did not exist prior to that. And so our IT office works with my office, and together we help develop that report.
So does allegations as well as founded incidents? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
And then in sort of where the police investigation begins and ends, I am assuming that if whatever activity goes on crosses into criminal,
yes, exactly.
Whether it is rape, attempted rape, assault and battery, malicious wounding, that's when it becomes a police investigation.
Yes.
Yes. And how do we, I mean, obviously.
There are occasional cases where a parent will go to the police.
That was my next question.
And make an allegation that may not be of something as quite as severe as those things that you have indicated, in the police in the course of investigating that. Again, through our agreement with our SROs, we have a pretty clear delineation
right.
of when someone would go forward, when the other person would be the follow-up, what notification to parents are, et cetera.
But if the parents come to press charges, then is it the SRO that is the police investigator, or is it somebody else?
It changes case to case. depends on what has been reported. Typically, the SRO at a high school or middle school will do an initial portion, but they may, when it's a parent allegation, it may include a detective. It just varies case to case.
Okay. And then I also assume that the Good Samaritan laws for our requirement to report any suspected child abuse, because we are all under law must report that. But there is a Good Samaritan law that continues so that if it ends up being unfounded,
right,
the employee is not held responsible.
That's true. That
Okay.
is true across the board. And part of the training for administrators is support for both the student who made the allegation and for students who were alleged to have done something, and what one does when it is unfounded, and how you ensure that there is not a hostile environment that follows after the investigation.
Okay. And then the last question is, what becomes accessible as a public record? In other words, what is foiable in all of allegations, founded, not founded, what have you? Where do you stand with
Most of it is, because it's student-specific, it is available via FERPA, or just a parent saying to us, well, I would like to see any information that is on my child, then this would come up. But it is not available. The reports that we make to OCR and those sorts of things are available via FOIA, but not anything that would be specific to any individual child.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, thank you very much. It is truly impressive, the work that you all are doing, and I'm very grateful for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Schultz.
So I have a couple of questions, and then I have a couple of places I want to go with this. First of all, you had mentioned that 35 to 40 focus groups had been done with students. When was that done?
2000 must have been the 14-15 school year. That included students. There were also, among that 35, there were some student groups, there were some administrator groups, there were some teacher groups.
Were those students, how were those students selected?
There was an entire process that I'd have to go back and look at the report that was done.
There was parental consent for those?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you also mentioned that every administrator received a 3-hour face-to-face training, and then the successive year on BHMS?
So the first year was on how to investigate allegations of sexual harassment.
When did those 3-hour face-to-face first start?
In August of 2014. Is that right? I'm looking at Jen. Is that right? Yes, I think so. August of 2014.
So if somebody received it in August 2014, the successive year, they would have received the training on the BHMS?
Yes. It was done as part of the same time frame as we do SR&R training, so they're used to that as being a mandatory face-to-face training.
Can we go to slide 27, please? You rattled off a bunch of statistics that are not in this presentation. That's a next step. The statistics that you quoted during your presentation, if those could be added. What was just the roll-up number of investigated 10 complaints of sexual harassment, but you didn't quantify who that was? Are those student-to-student sexual harassment, or that's employee to?
No, those were 11 cases involving sexual harassment on their face. 7 of those involved employees on employees, 4 of which involves staff on students, or staff involved with students.
So this is what I want to get to. What do you mean, what year?
Right.
It doesn't matter to me. They just gave the date. They had this slide, but then they gave the verbal as a part of the presentation of the data that she just put it back to us. And my question is, if we could go now to slide 5. This data, in combination with what you just said, is defining the problem. And the problem I have with this presentation is I don't think we've talked about where the problem is. Because you just said in basically about a 2-year span, there were 4 allegations of basically employee to student and 7 employee to employee. And the concern I get when we start talking about volunteers coming into buildings and contractors, and frankly, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, when you brought up the Virtus, I had a very visible reaction to that. The problem becomes when you start talking about creating measures that are not focused on where the actual problem is. And the Virtus program in the parochial schools was created to vet parents. That wasn't the problem. That didn't name the problem. And so we can't prevent, student to student sexual harassment. I'm assuming that the 1.8%, you cannot add 1.8 plus 1.4 plus 0.40 plus 0.70, which comes up to 4.3%, because those are probably subsets of the 1.8 to some degree. I mean, I don't know. But we haven't named what the problem here is who has done these things to these students. This is self-reported. Is this adult to student? Is this student to student? Is this male to female? Is this male to male? Is this female to female? What is this? So we don't have an understanding of quantifying where the problem is happening. And then we have 40,000 employees and 4 instances of an employee to a student. And so I think we have to have a discussion about where the problem is actually happening. And to hear that an administrator in a building now has a 3-hour face-to-face training, if there is anything that crops up and everyone is reported to, because I wrote it down, everyone is a reporter, is a mandatory reporter, then we have a system in place, because the second somebody reports this, it should trigger the system, right? But the question is, who do they report it to? And I didn't hear anything about when that mandatory reporter issue is triggered, who are they, what happens? None of us know, as a result of this presentation, what's the process by which HR gets called? Who in HR? Do 40,000 employees have Chase Ramey's telephone number so that they're calling him? And what happens with a student? Where does the student report as a result of this? What happens? What does a student do when a student has experienced an occasion of sexual harassment? And is it different if they experience sexual harassment from a fellow student or from an employee? What do they do differently? I don't know as a result of this. And I'm not interested in a Virtus program that vets parents or contractors into buildings, because that's not the issue. The issue is, how do you get to what's really behind these numbers, and what does a student do when that happens? I don't know.
So these numbers are from Youth Survey, and the question is phrased in a way that it is student to student, is what is being asked. Not student to student, but youth to student, somebody that you are dating, as opposed to, an adult in authority. In terms of information about what they should do if they experience student-on-student harassment, we've been very explicit with them about who to report to. And then in terms of sort of the... So they are told, again, they are told to go to a trusted adult, to a teacher, to a counselor, and those people have in turn been trained to go to the administrator with the allegation.
Then what?
Then there is an investigation that the administrator does that's very clearly laid out.
Nowhere in this. That was the crux of the desire of this presentation, is what happens? How does a student who has experienced sexual harassment by either a fellow student or an employee, what do they do, and how is that process handled, and what has happened, what has transpired to date, and what was not working about what has transpired to date? What was the process to date? And what did you look at and say, you know what, this is not working. These are our recommendations going forward. that something in our system, is, great, and we want to highlight that, and something in our system is not so great, and we want to fix it. There's nothing here that has been presented, and that's exactly my point, is the main data point that's in here comes from a youth survey that's self-reporting, that only some students participate in, and which, there's a lot of talk amongst students that this is, even though you have ways of weeding them out, that this is treated as a joke. So I'm not saying that there isn't some viable data to come from this, but at the end of the day, we are trying to be responsive to a very serious crisis within the nation, but certainly what our responsibility is within the buildings. And I don't get from this how we communicate in the past to a student or to an employee how you report sexual harassment and what wasn't working, what you investigated, and what we're going to fix going forward. I am very frustrated by this because I don't think we're coming out of this with any more answers. I frankly have more questions as a result of this about how we're going to protect kids and how we're going to protect employees from sexual harassment and what results, how you prevent it, and once it potentially an allegation of it happening, how we're fixing what isn't working within our system.
Ms. Schultz, did you want to suggest a follow-up with specific? Okay.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
I would like our board to remember that we need to presume positive intentions from staff when they're presenting on these topics. At every one of these work sessions, we're willing to entertain next steps. If there's areas that you don't think we're covered, we'll be glad to try to cover them. But I believe our staff are working very hard in trying to be proactive. Is there more we can do? We can always look at it. But I just want to say that as a reminder. They've worked very hard on this presentation. We're doing a lot. We're not perfect. We're not Cat 3 on this topic. That's part of the reason the board, I know, brought it to the forum and wanted it. So if there's areas that you still think we need to put a finer point on, we'll be glad to do it.
I appreciate that, Dr. Brabrand, but the reality is that we have to be in the business of identifying risks, identifying liabilities, identifying risk prevention, and identifying the paths which we can clearly communicate. And communication always seems to be sort of the Achilles heel on communicating clearly what it is that somebody in the midst of, a very potentially traumatic experience, and whether this is an IEP or a transportation issue or whatever it is, once somebody is in the storm of trying to figure out what do I do next, where is the clarity in the process? And I also think, another next step is I think we should post the voluntary resolution agreement. What was presented here today was that we have, starting back in 2014, done 3-hour face-to-face with every building administrator and bullying and harassment management system, and the question is, in what we've done in the past and what is being recommended now, I don't understand as a result of this. This is what we looked at. This is what's working. This is what's not working. This is what we recommend going forward so that there can be clarity when somebody is in the midst of this storm. I don't think that is an unusual recommendation or even expectation from a board when we're having a presentation on something that we've been waiting for like this, to say, look, we looked at some stuff and there's some stuff that we're not super on, and this is what we recommend going forward to help people who are in the midst of a storm like this when it occurs.
May I make a suggestion just based on what you said? What I think I hear you saying, Ms. Schultz, is as a next step, do we need to clarify steps for reporting for our students when they have these issues, as well as what follow-up they can take to monitor progress?
I don't understand as a result of this,
I understand what you're saying.
what happens when it said, we were told that everybody is a mandatory reporter and that the report has to go to HR. That is that's not a 30,000 foot roll up. That's a 10-mile roll up of, okay, and then what? What happens? That's the clarity that the community needs, is what happens when a report is made.
I really want to, I hear your frustration, and I think, certainly that's appropriate. But I think I'm trying to articulate for staff so that we can move forward with this, okay? And capture it. So I think I
think there needs to be a clear process definition of what happens. First of all, what do you do if you're a student or employee? And then what happens thereafter? What is it functionally, operationally, that happens in an organization this size that somebody can see transparency, can see that if I make a report, I understand that something will happen to it.
Okay, so is that helpful?
We'll be glad to do the protocols. Let me say the one nugget that speaks to me from this presentation that I'm still, as superintendent, trying to struggle with. We have 1,000 kids report these kind of pressures, but we know we're only getting a handful of reports of, right? Something, they're telling us this on a survey, but they're not necessarily coming to an adult. To me, it's that first tier. It's not even about, part of it I get once it's reported protocols, but another part is our kids aren't coming and telling us in these face-to-face conversations. And how do we create a climate and culture? Maybe it's better to find protocols would help kids be more willing to do it.
I don't know that it is 1,000 though, and this is the part that I want to be very cautious about, because the 446, the 130, and the 217 could be subsets.
Yes,
and
I
so
got you.
I don't want to say that 1,300 kids are experiencing sexual harassment at the hands of another student. I want to be very, very, and that's the frustrating thing about the data points here, that we're taking self-reported things from an instrument that isn't designed to do what we're doing here, which is reporting the statistics. That's not statistically accurate to say that 1,300 students, but I don't know what is statistically accurate. And still, we don't know what is it. You did hit on it, that what is it the student's supposed to do? We're not getting 582 or 400 or 130 or 217. We're not getting those. That's because they don't know what to do. That's the point.
Okay. So, Ms. Schultz, are you finished? Thank you. Okay, so I think we're looking for some more clarity. Maybe staff can think about how we can do that. I know that was a mouthful. And I think the next person we have is Megan.
Thank you. Just tagging on to something Ms. Schultz said, I think it's always important that if we have published what our protocol is, what the process is, then there's clarity for whether it's a student or employee. And I think that's an easy next step that we can do, and I fully support that. I will probably disagree a little bit with what Ms. Schultz just said just a very moment ago. Why we may not see or hear about some of these youth survey responses, as someone who had a very serious relationship through her 3 years of high school, I mean, that was my relationship with my boyfriend. I would maybe talk to my parents or my good friends and deal with it that way, but I certainly wouldn't be going to my school administrators or teachers necessarily to tell them about what my dating pressures are. I mean, that's just, so I think if we create a climate where students can feel like we provide a climate if that's where they need a safe place, because maybe talking to their families isn't the safe environment to do that. But I wouldn't want to jump to the conclusion that it's because we didn't have a process, students aren't coming to us. I just may not be their natural inclination to see us as the solution for that. But I do want to also say, Dr. Brabrand is someone who tends to ask a lot of questions. Thank you for teeing it up. Without a doubt, my asking questions doesn't mean I am less appreciative of the great work that's being done here. And it's always easier to sit back and review something and say, oh, what about this? Rather than to have created it on the blank canvas. So I'll start with that. But something that caught me right off the bat is on something this important, preventing and responding to sexual assault and harassment. When you then go to slide 3 and 4, we ended up changing the title and putting sexual violence. So first it starts out with assault and harassment, which I think is very comprehensive. Sexual violence, I just wanted to suggest to my colleagues and Dr. Braybrand, especially if the last bullet on slide 3, where it says non-contact unwanted sexual experience, verbal harassment. If the whole crux of what we're trying to talk about here is sexual harassment and sexual assault, the sexual violence terminology is pretty serious. I mean, if I were a parent, not a school board member, and I'm seeing this published, I'm like, Fairfax County has got sexual violence going on. So could someone explain to me just why we wanted to use what I think is a really terrifying term for what I think was meant to be, what I see is a more comprehensive global look at this whole issue?
I think like we have the Office for Women in Domestic and Sexual Violence. So sexual violence is an overarching term that includes all of those different things. And then we were narrowing the focus to what you wanted. So, what the board wanted for sexual
So
assault.
I appreciate that you were going out and using other, nonprofits to help inform the work, but it's a humble suggestion to me, but I don't think sexual violence serves our communication purposes here in this one, and it worries me a little bit seeing it there. I would much rather that we keep it at what this was globally, so something to think about. I don't want to create undue fear in our students and families with that there. And then in terms of something that was really important on slide 5 on the youth survey, dating aggression. And I share this because staff, I know you communicate with the county that does the youth survey. And I think I heard that there used to be 1 question, now maybe there's 8. But to pick up on what Ms. Evans said and Ms. Corbett-Sanders said, and someone who's, had college and high school children within the last, currently and over the last 5 to 8 years, dating has changed dramatically since 30 years ago when I was their age. The Friends with Benefits, they've made 2 separate movies on it. That is the culture. So when we use the word dating, a lot of these kids might look at it and say, well, I'm not dating. So that's the end of that. But there's a lot that goes on between the Friends with Benefits. So I don't know how we capture that. I know Ms. Corbett-Sanders said something about the online dating pressures and stuff, but I'm just going to the terminology piece. Kids, they're not dating, but they're doing a lot of stuff. Sorry to say.
And we will certainly look for other wording options. We tend to try to also look at national surveys so we can then do a comparison of us to national.
And I'm just offering this because I don't know who develops the surveys, but maybe they don't have teenage and college age kids. But I mean, again, we're in a changing world, and
it's a collaboration between the schools and the county.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I wanted to kind of echo is I do think it would be very helpful as a next step that we do publish the 2014 voluntary resolution agreement that we entered into. If it's not on the website, again, that might be something that as a next step, staff talks to Dr. Braybrand about, because I don't even know the legal implications.
I think we have to talk to John Foster, yeah.
Right. Yep. Absolutely, and that's why I'm putting as a next step that it needs to be looked into. And I would just put as a caveat, as a board member who served in 2014, I think we might need a closed session conversation about how that came about, and then what was reported to the board or not reported to the board on that. I think that's important. And then I wanted to go to slide 15. When we talk about the bullying and harassment management system, is someone aware now or can get for me, when was this actually put into place?
So in 2014-15, we had a paper version. So we came out with we had a tool anyhow that the schools could use that was a paper version. They sent that in. So my office got it, but it then required us to put that information into some sort of a database and try to make sense of it. It was a lot of narrative. When we built out the bullying and harassment management system, which went into effect the next year, it included what principals say they find to be most useful is it leads them through the investigation process. So each thing that you enter into the bullying and harassment management system is, in fact, the steps you should take when you are making an investigation and what information you should be documenting as you do it, which is part of the reason the training for the use of it was more than just a training of here you click here and you push there and this is the button, but a training for everything from what kinds of sensitivities might you need to have when you are interviewing a student who has reported an allegation of harassment, through what kinds of interventions might you need at the end of the process, whether it was a founded case or an unfounded case. So the system just captures that data, but the process was part of the instruction that we did.
Okay. Just real on that second bullet, manual of how to conduct an investigation, including sensitivity to target of, I just think you might want to put to the target of harassment, because I mean, I first read that and without the target starts to look like a verb and not that it's you're talking about the victim, right? Yes. Yeah. So here's a really crucial question, and everybody knows that this has been an issue that was also in the media. The BHMS system. On next slide 16, says that it documents allegations of student-to-student bullying and harassment. Have we expanded it now so it includes staff-to-staff or, at minimum, staff-to-student?
That is not currently part of the system, no.
Okay. So what I want to bring to everybody's attention is, in particular, the Lake Braddock High School situation. The question was brought from the community of why wasn't this logged into the bullying harassment management system when the students reported it, and then we would have had a mechanism to actually know that it got reported and what happened. But as you're seeing right here, we created a system where the only thing that's getting logged is when students do something to each other. But we do know, as Ms. Schultz also helped highlight, that, you know, not quite 50% of the investigations we're doing is student to staff. So
that's of the 11 investigations.
Right.
We had hundreds of investigations in this through the bullying and harassment management system.
Right. But the point being that we know, even just through the small little number that's coming through OCR, or sorry, the EOC office department, that there is student to staff harassment or worse going on. So I guess I'm trying to understand, was there rationale for not having the bullying harassment management system capturing up when it's not student to student, but it's student to staff? Is it just because you want to just process it differently?
The rationale initially was that the tool was designed to be able to provide information that we were required to provide for the, and is now required nationally, for student-on-student harassment to OCR. And so we built a system that collected information on student harassment.
Okay. So, and I appreciate that, Marianne, in the sense that you're talking about hundreds of allegations get made. That's a big tracking system versus the smaller numbers that so far have been showing up where it's student to staff. But, you know, I do think we not only see it in the media, but, you know, nationally, it becomes a challenge when there's student to employee. And yeah, I mean, I would just put that as a next step that I think, Dr. Brabrand, we have to figure something out about how are we going to capture it, because that accountability piece was missing. The next question I have is on slide 22. It's saying all new employees are required to complete the discrimination and harassment awareness training at the time of hire. Could someone just briefly explain why only new employees? Like, so for example, Karen Corbett Sanders joined the board in January of 2016? 16. January 2016. But I joined the board 4 years earlier in January 2012. And I looked at Ms. Evans, who I've been serving with little bit longer together, and neither one of us have had this because it obviously happened before we joined the board, but wouldn't we want everybody to have that?
Well, currently that's the mechanism that we use to capture new employees as they're coming in. We do provide that training and make it available online to other individuals, typically in a response to a complaint or some sort of concern that's come to our office. But I have to turn.
Well, did you want?
No, I think the answer is yes. I mean, we would want everybody to have that, and we talked about the online module for instructional staff that they have to do on an annual basis. We need to continue to build that piece for the support. And I mean, I was surprised as well that that we'd have that. And so I think it's one of those, as Ms. Schultz talked about earlier, kind of one of our learnings is that's an area where we need to grow and become more robust, not only on the online pieces, but like we talked about going out and doing more routine trainings that are face-to-face with staff and administrators.
Well, thank you. And I'm really sensitive again to how pressed we are to fit everything into professional development. But not to call Ms. Loveglass, but she knows that all of us, if I want to be able to access my online, I've got to sit through this cute little video every amount of time on the responsibilities and appropriate use of technology and FCPS. I think we should look at that same model that every employee needs to have had this.
We've actually had that conversation
I mean,
about is there a way, because I think we do my time at the same time, and so do we add this as a module to that? And so it's again about building it and rolling it out. But Ms. McLaughlin, that is one of the considerations that we've had is tying it to that, so that when folks do their annual appropriate use, that it's a piece of that.
Yeah. I'm almost wrapping up, I promise. Slide 21, just right before it. Again, this kind of concerned me a little bit with this focus on student harassment. So it says on the first bullet, all school-based administrators are trained to document allegations and conduct investigations regarding to student harassment. But I'm aware of at least 2 cases alone where it was employee to student. And if those principals and those school building administrators aren't trained on what do they do when it's an employee to student, then they may not even realize or know what to, like, I think it's kind of, again, kind of where if I were.
Are you suggesting that as a next step?
Absolutely,
Okay.
because I will say we're in my district where this has been a concern, they're going to read this and just say, once again, you're only focusing on student to student. What are you doing about student to employee? So, and then on slide 23, where we do the e-learning course, defining the boundaries between employees and students and providing guidance to boundaries. And maybe Dr. Payne, you can explain this. Are we doing anything in the student health to give the students this type of training on proper boundaries between employees and students? And the reason I say that is because students need to obviously have awareness and understand what's proper, what's not, what's improper. And they also need to realize too that they might be becoming friendly with their teacher and the teacher's rebuffing it and they think the teacher is being mean, but it's because the teacher's following this and saying there's just protective measures in place on how to set up appropriate. So I think
let's let her address that, please. Question.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So we currently don't talk about students to adults in the boundary setting. There's some personal boundaries. We begin at the lower levels, primary levels in general health. The FLE Advisory Committee just looked at adding more information for students about setting personal boundaries and respecting boundaries, but we have not looked at the adult piece. So that would be something we could look into.
Yeah, I think
is that suggested as a next step, Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. One second. Let me let her wrap it up. Are you done, Ms. McLaughlin?
I am, and I appreciate the added time.
Okay. All right.
I have a clarifying question. The staff said that there is a requirement to report to the state and even nationally student to student sexual harassment. Is there no requirement to report when an employee sexually harasses a student?
No, there is under the VDOE circumstances that set up of when we're required to report to the state. Misconduct that the state would deem appropriate to look at revocation of a license. I don't have the language off the top of my head, Ms. Schultz, but we do have those pieces that we are required. We've been working very closely with the state. When we have questions, we call and we talk to them about and get their guidance on that. But yes, there are some guidance for us from VDOE.
But do we only have to report under the guise of a revocation a mindset, or do we have to report the data?
I'll have to check. I don't believe that they just have us report out the data on that, but we can look. I'm just not, it's no survey or data like that is coming to mind about what we have to report out.
Okay. So I think she's asking for our further clarification on that. Am I okay?
That's back to we haven't named the problem.
That's okay. Thank you. All right. Brian?
So thank you all. I'll first start out by saying that I disagree that the purpose of this session was to outline the process by which someone reports and gets feedback or and goes through the process of sexual harassment. As the person that brought this forward, my goal was to see what the system the problems in the system, what the system has done to ameliorate those over the past few years, and what we can do going forward. Now, I will agree with Ms. Schultz on the fact that her frustration that this presentation lacks a clear focus on where we are going forward. And that's something I've raised with staff now 4 times as we've had various meetings on this. And the response I got, which is fair, is that they wanted to look to the board to see where we go forward. I think we've had some very good suggestions today by Ms. Corbett-Sanders and others. So anyway, that's my piece on that. The one place I would stress that I do think we need to look is the pilot that took place at Oakton High School on self-defense courses. And for those that don't have the background of this, there was a student that came to me several years ago looking to do implement a self-defense course in the school. She connected with Liz Payne, and they were able to make that a reality. Now, clearly, the police department has not committed resources to this, but I, as a next step, would ask Liz, Scott, others in their meetings with FCPD that they make this a priority and that we look at implementing this countywide. And so I have a lot more to say about this, but that can be my one next step for today. Thanks.
Okay. Well, we almost stayed on time. But I wanted to make sure, I know this has been kind of a hot topic, and I wanted people to have an opportunity, at least I think we wanted people to have an opportunity to kind of use this to really flush out concerns. And I do think I personally wanted to make sure we're really addressing concerns that where parents can feel assured that we are addressing this issue, not just student to student, but anything that can be, as you referred to, as staff impacted. Because I think that we've had references as staff to student. I'm not sure that in your discussion you were actually saying that staff may have perpetrated, but somehow staff was involved. And I think that's an important distinction. Thank you. As someone who has worked with kids and trying to figure out issues, this is not an easy alligator to wrestle. So I just want to thank you for attempting to bring this information forth. I want this particularly Ms. Schultz to know that I certainly, prior to coming here, asked questions about dealing with the staff to student, whatever that meant, aspect. And so we've already made staff aware that that is a particular concern. So I have just a couple of things I want to make sure we're dealing with, and a lot of it does have to do with the power structure when you have a staff member and a student. And I want to make sure that in our outreach to students and staff that they understand how that can be interpreted. The quandary we face, I think, is that so much of our success as educators depends on relationship. And so we have to be very careful in those boundaries and making sure that we're communicating that. I'm certain that staff has been trying to do that, but recent events suggest that, perhaps we need to focus more on that and try to see how we can improve. The other concern I have is when a student is impacted by either bullying or harassment, I'm not sure from this presentation what the notification process is to a parent or how we handle that. The follow-up of that also would be when we determine it to be a founded complaint, what are the steps to make sure that we're dealing with what could have been created in that child who was a victim, and or is that part of our restorative justice process? I would think that it should be. So I would like to make sure that we're thinking about all of those ramifications. And perhaps that can be captured by a magician in a next step. Okay. I wanted to focus also that we're focusing on a culture. We're really trying to, that's what this whole Me Too thing is about. We're changing culture. And also that, you know, we're dealing with a student body that communicates in a different way. And so I'd like for us to think about how we can utilize social media to educate not just our staff, but students on how we should be respectfully communicating with one another and even becoming aware of what's not appropriate. So it's another suggestion. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, have we considered online reporting of these types of things, or are we doing that where people can have access? I believe for students in particular, as Ms. McLaughlin mentioned, when they are involved in these relationships, it is not easy to go to an adult. And I'm not sure that we can rely on a student that might not be as apt as our student representative to take that information to the right person. And so I'd like to think about what other avenues we might be able to make available to our students. While the purpose of this session may not have been to outline what the steps can be, we might also want to think about outlining for parents and for students, this is what we're dealing with, and this is how we handle it. These are the steps available on our website. And so I think I'm going to stop there and we can eat lunch. How long do we have, Ryan? Oh, next steps, I'm sorry. Next steps. So.
Can I just say something before you go to next
Sure.
steps? And just thank the board for the candid conversation. I mean, we hear what the board's saying, and I thank you again to the team. We are continuing to work on some of these things, both next steps and places where we've also identified that there's some areas for growth that we kind of mentioned that maybe the board didn't talk about. And we understand that even though they interact every single day, when we have departments that are geared towards supporting staff and then we have departments geared towards supporting students, sometimes we need to make sure that they're overlapping and they're interlinking. And some of the things that we've looked at have shown us there's some areas that we can improve there. And so I want the board to know that we're taking this very seriously and that we're going to continue to work on this because we all want our students and our staff to feel safe and supported when they're in our buildings. And so we'll continue to move forward in our work in this area. So thank you again for all your feedback and these suggestions for next steps.
Okay, so let's look at these one at a time, and we'll make sure everything is captured correctly. Ms. Evans, yours, is that correct? Okay, consider improvements in recognizing signs of human trafficking, including staff training and possible question on youth survey. Any opposition to that one? Okay, number 2, Ms. Palchik, consider including volunteers in training.
Yeah, so Dr. Ramey wanted it to be part of a larger conversation. I'm okay leaving it here so we make sure it actually is included as well.
Okay, any opposition to that? Number 3, add training for students regarding online interaction. Ms. Quinn.
It's part of it, but it doesn't really capture the whole intention. It's to recognize the changes in dating and social interaction to being more of an online social use of social media and how that can be, educating students on how those relationships need to actually be developed that are not controlling or somehow like that. it's addressing the changes in dating to being more online interactions and how that impacts the control, or I don't know. Don't use the word control. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it looks like they get what you're trying to get at.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Any opposition to that one? Saying that, yeah. To control.
Add training for students where? You're talking about changing the curriculum?
Within our add training for students within the curriculum, yeah. And is it through health education or through FLE? I'd prefer it in health education because it impacts mental health, socio-emotional health, and others.
Well, I don't know how that's going to impact 8 when we get to 8, but okay.
Okay.
And maybe we can combine some of these. I don't care. And then on the next one, extend training on sexual harassment, human trafficking to all building administration and coaches. But there was a second piece of that, which was to create greater awareness within buildings for not only staff, but for students on signs of reporting. You know, it's kind of like the old see something, say something, but it was actually years ago they would have health notices up on on our classroom walls, being aware of things. And so this is a different type of notice within the buildings to make sure that students know and are aware of it. So posters.
Right, and Just Ask does that, but it's only in the schools in which they're present. So
and it should be in every school, is what I'm saying. It shouldn't be limited to a building administrator saying, oh, it's a good idea, this is an issue. This building administrator doesn't think it's a good issue, good idea. It's something that is prevalent across our nation, and we should be doing this in all of our schools.
Okay.
Middle and high school at a minimum.
Any opposition to that one? Okay, number 5, Corbett Sanders again.
That kind of is part of the greater awareness building, so
Do you want
it's
to delete
fine.
this one?
You can delete it, actually.
Okay, delete number 5, Eileen, thanks. The following one, provide data or start collecting data in bullying and harassment, adult to student. Is that correct?
This is correct, but I know Mrs. McLaughlin had some language on this as well, so if we can combine them, I think that's a good idea.
Ms. McLaughlin, what would you add to this or adjust?
The student data. Fine.
Okay.
Maybe just say one suggestion is to look at.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Just.
You're just trying to make.
Okay. Any opposition to that? Okay. Provide statistics quoted during presentation in writing to board. Schultz. Okay. Any problem with that one? Provide info on how to prevent harassment, how to report it, and what happens after the report and investigation. Provide defined protocols.
I want to know what we kind of think.
Sorry. Just to offer an example, I mean, when we had the situation at Lake Braddock, parents were like, okay, we've brought the complaint several times now to several different administrators, and then what? So if we have the published protocol of how does FCPS handle complaints that are brought to its attention, if we publish the protocol, then people should be able to follow the step-by-steps.
So this gets back to the point that I was trying to make, and I may not have had clarity earlier. I am very upset about this, and so If I don't have clarity, that's my fault, but we can't stop students from harassing other students. What we can do is give them tools to tell them what's not acceptable behavior and then how to report it. We have a whole different level, and Ms. Keys-Gamarro is correct in talking about the power structure and the way we train employees. That's our purview, and that's not naming the problem. You know, what minor children do to other minor children, yes, we have a responsibility to educate and give them tools. What adults are doing with minor children is a whole different kettle of fish. And we have to have absolute clarity, not only to us as a board, but to the public about, look, if something happens, what's the gate? You know, and what's the path? And I think it's important to say that we are going to publish what's the process by which a student, we're not even clear on whether or not there's a reporting requirement on the data. You know, so we're only talking about student to student. This is very, very important when you're talking about a person of power having, you know, an influence in this regard over a minor child in our buildings. I don't want that. I don't want it bifurcated. I mean, certainly, I think that we still have to have the understanding about what happens when it's student to student. But the issue is that I want to elevate in this conversation is we have parents entrusting their children and required by law, unless they're being otherwise educated, to be in our buildings. And when you have a power structure under that scenario where something happens to a child, what's next? What is the expectation? That's the part that's missing that I frankly, I disagree with Mr. McElveen. I do think that was crucial to be a part of this, because that's the elephant in the room that, nobody wants to have this conversation. It's very, very difficult. I agree. This is a hard thing to talk about. But we must own the fact that we have to be public about what that process is, so that people have clarity that when a report comes in, what will happen next.
So does this capture that? No.
Yeah, I don't know that the prevent piece is a part of it. Yeah.
Okay, just delete prevent harassment.
Yeah.
Just
how to report it and what happens.
Yeah.
Yes.
Harassment stays.
Yeah. Okay. Any concerns with this one? Okay. The syntax needs to be fixed on 7, but let's move on. 8. In providing defined protocols, ensure that parental notification and care of victim is included, and possibly post the protocols on the website.
You don't need the end of that one because that's above.
Okay.
But that's what you mean by publish, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, Eileen, delete that. Yeah.
In mine, you could add provide and publish defined protocols.
Okay, and then we can delete number 8. Karen, is that okay with you? We'll combine yours with Schultz.
Just put my name up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Number 9. Consider posting 2014 voluntary resolution agreement pending.
Why consider? That's a public document. Oh, well, okay.
So post it, but
Post it with redactions as necessary.
Yeah, it would have to be approved.
Scott, you want to speak?
It says pending approval, so I feel like you're capturing the essence in here. Post it pending approval. If there's something that needs to be redacted or taken out, we can figure out how to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, the header of sexual violence, Ms. McLaughlin, revisit that.
I don't think you need it up there.
Okay.
I've made it heads up to Scott and staff.
Okay. Next one, slide 15, presentation. Add the yeah, that's.
You can just get rid of it.
Yeah, just delete it. You guys got it. Okay, following one, Ms. McLaughlin, all school-based administrators should be trained to document allegations and conduct investigations regarding staff-to-student harassment, not just student-to-student.
I know what I read was. I read we were capturing or recording the data. I didn't see anything that said we're actually going to train them and put that kind of intentional language in.
Okay, any issue with that?
All right, Karen Corbett Sanders said she did ask for that.
Higher up.
All right, then
So we can combine them.
you could, that's fine.
Add training for two. No,
Yours is
above
for
that.
students, mine,
No, wait. There was one where it was supposed to extend training coaches.
Number 4.
4. So combine the two. Combine yours and mine again.
I don't like it because it's not drawing out the point that we're not training them on student to staff.
I'm okay with
So just keep mine, it's fine, it's a little more, it's just more targeted.
Okay, we'll just keep it, okay? Number 10, add defining boundaries between students and e-learn IT course that defines the boundaries between employees and students and provide guidance on boundaries.
The cursor's in front of that, so that's okay. I would put quotes around defining boundaries, so they, on the e-learn it course or something, that's what it's called. Yeah. Okay, anyway, that looks fine to me. I think that we were saying we want to make sure the students were getting similar training on, proper boundaries.
Okay, any issues with that? Okay, next one is mine. I would just please add the word system-wide prior to self-defense. And then
Would you mind having it say access as opposed to implementing? Because,
sure,
fine. Access to.
Accessing.
Yeah, and Ryan, in our area, we're doing this, but we're not doing it with FCPD only. There are a couple of other groups that are working with the community. And so you might want to say.
We just take out FCPD.
With FCPD and or other.
Just delete, just to make a priority.
Yeah.
Delete in meetings, yeah. Okay.
And for the I'm sorry. For number 12, I'd like for it not just to say online, but hotline. Did you turn me off?
No, I turned you on and you turned you off.
Never mind, sorry. Leave my button alone. Okay, so hotline, online, / so that it's, I'm just trying to find a type of anonymous way that they can report.
And I'm sorry, we missed mine, which was what is the reporting requirement, the state or national reporting requirement for staff to student sexual harassment?
Oh, yes. Can I
just get some clarity on?
Yeah, just one second. Let us finish that one if you don't mind. Is my question would be, it kind of added to 13, is there a reg, do we have a regulation for this?
I don't know. That's what I want. I want to know what are the state and national reporting requirements for staff to student sexual harassment?
Right, and I'm saying, does FCPS have a reg that covers what you're talking about? So that would be the next aspect of that. Okay.
And Ms. Keys-Gamarra, can you actually add the word anonymous on 12?
Yes, please add the word anonymous on number 12. And I think Chase had a question.
I think we might need to come back for some clarity as we work through that. It might be a little.
For number 12, you mean?
Yes, because if the idea is that we then investigate those, at some point we're going to need to know who's reporting so we can contact that person. And so if it's just so we know it's happening, that would be a benefit of anonymous. But if it's so that the division can go back and look into it, we're going to need to know those individuals.
Well, it says consider, so, I mean,
Right,
it's
I'm
just
just
giving
carrying
us,
that,
let's
right,
let's
that's why I
take a
said-
dive into it, we can come back to the board
Yes, okay.
based on what we find.
Okay with the anonymous not being there, but you do it what we can do. My goal is to try to make it easier. Okay.
Okay, those last two, any concerns with that? Okay, with that, this session is adjourned. We're going to take a 30-minute lunch break. Over lunch, we're going to discuss the schedule for the rest of the day. Thanks.